And another thing, I trust my mind more than I trust my gun. Just picking up from yesterday, many of you responded to my opening statements yesterday when I said my greatest weapon is my mind. My tool is a gun. It could be a tie tool, it could be a razor, it could be anything. Many of you got it. Many of you understood it. Some of you were a bit confused by it. You shouldn't be. It is not the device you use in your hand to defend yourself. It is your wit on how to use it and when to use it that is most fierce. Or it should be. My father taught me that. So my greatest weapon is my mind. I'll use a lot of different tools. Which brings me to what I just said, ladies and gentlemen. You know, we've reached a point now whereby it is always easiest to grab a tool. In other words, be it an electric screwdriver, be it even a microwave, a nailer, nail gun, Bostitch, Cinco, whatever. We always grab the power tool, no less than a handgun or a shotgun or whatever, without realizing it is how you use it. And, you know, as a backyard carpenter, you learn very quickly to measure twice and cut once. You don't blame the saw necessarily. You blame your wit. You blame your ability to use that saw. I got that. You often hear this from individuals who would go, you know, guns don't kill people, people kill people. They're right. You're absolutely right. But this does involve the availability of that weapon. You see, one can also make the converse of that argument. Without guns, then people won't be shot. By a gun, I mean, you can reason with that. Well, if there were no guns, guess what? There'd be fewer people shot. Let's see the hands who agree with that. All you got to do is go to a country like, let's just say, Great Britain or Australia, even Zimbabwe, and you will see that the handguns are not the weapons of choice. Probably more get killed by elephants and hippos, and there'd be a few machete chops here and there. But I want to make this very, very clear now, because what I'm about to share with you is a story that you have not heard probably. It's very obscure. It's just, it's one that bothers me more than anything else. It bothers me, and it's going to bother you. I'm going to tell you that. Because to me, it represents the inability of a man to use his wit. Just because you say you're in fear of your life, well, God knows if you're in fear of... Look, I've seen men completely almost kill themselves trying to get away from a bee. Heaven forbid there's a roach in the room. I mean, grown men, bro.
Oh, yeah.
Won't sleep until they find it. Oh, it starts to fly. You know, roaches are not good navigators. I don't know why God gave them wings.
Well, yeah.
They're just too heavy for wings.
Right.
And they don't know it.
No, they have them.
They don't know it. It's almost, it's almost like,
Kind of like chickens.
Well, yeah. So like a chicken. Why they give them wings? You can't fly.
They don't really, kind of like...
But they can't really. You can't. Why give them wings if you can't fly? I mean, they can't fly. They can't swim like penguins.
Well, even penguins have wings, but they do use them to swim.
Well, they might use them to cool off things, or eggs maybe. I don't know. Yeah, right. Well, why give them? Back to the story. There are people who have an inability to make rational decisions based upon what is before them. And I know that law enforcement officers go through this. They go through some training that basically, obstacle courses where you have a friendly and where you have a perpetrator. And you got to know the difference at a split second and so forth. But unfortunately, it seems as though as of late, the one rule of thumb here is, I'm in fear of my life. That's it. If someone's coming toward me, if they don't follow my commands, I'm in fear of my life. Because surely the person who's not following my commands has got to be armed. I'm armed. Surely I've got to feel that this person heard the commands, and so therefore, they must feel they must want to hurt me. So therefore, and that's easy for a scared man to assume. You see, your task as law enforcement is to evaluate the situation and use lethal force only when such time lethal force, you should think that lethal force can be used against you. Now, in the interpretation of the average guy, it would be, someone can bite me to death. Bite me on the jugular. Might use their bare hands. He's a bigger guy. Or that means, look, I don't want to dirty my hands. I don't want to get hurt trying to do this when I can just drop you right there. I can put 3 slugs in your chest. Now, it's time out for that now. And the way it's time out is that you good God-fearing Americans who are protesting have got to push through laws, ordinances in your cities that says, wait now, unless there is evidence of lethal force being used against you or attempted to be used against you, you can't use it. Which means now you've got to use something more than just your service revolver or your service weapon. You have got to now use your wit. The story. It's coming out of Texas, ladies and gentlemen, and not nearly got nearly as much attention as what you received in Sacramento, California. I think there's still protests going on. We had it on our website, our Facebook page. You saw it. Both the helicopter view and the other view. And, of course, my position was pure and simple. The person who was killed, there was a call in his neighborhood that he's using a toolbar to break into house, break into cars. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you something. I imagine that there could be someone in that house or in that car. What was his intent? Now, he's the reason why the police showed up. He's the reason why the police were called. He's the reason. Now, there's no doubt about that. I'm not saying he deserved to die yet. What I am saying, however, is that at that point in time, whoever was the victim was calling 911. That's the victim. And you can't give him a pass on that. It's time out for that. Typically, those individuals who in some cases will take to the street would be more than likely those individuals who will be the next victim of a guy like that. Whatever the reason. Now, that said, they follow this guy. You can see him, the area view. You can see this guy. This is not the story I'm going to tell you. This is the first one. All right? There in Sacramento. So they follow this guy, and then, of course, law enforcement, very tactically, 2 law enforcement officers follow the guy, see the guy. At that time, they didn't know he was behind his grandmother's house. They see him, call out again, show me your hands. Then this is the second time they did it. He kept going, kept running. And then he gets behind his grandmother's house. They see him. They get in a tactical position behind a corner, had the ability to determine whether or not this guy was armed or not armed, or whether he would comply. He turned to them. They thought he had a weapon. It was a cell phone. And then 20 shots rang out. Approximately 10 shots may have hit him. When you see the little pings there on the infrared, those are the rounds that either passed through him or missed him. About 20 rounds were fired, 10 from each officer. He's dead. My position then, and it still is, that a shot shouldn't have been taken. It was taken. Now, he's the reason for it. He's the reason for it. But the shot should have been taken, primarily because there should have been laws already on the books that simply said, okay, there has to be evidence. You see, law enforcement are the ones with the Kevlar vests. They're the ones with the radios. They're the ones with the infrared. And they're the ones then who are controlling time at that point. What do I mean by that? You see, most law enforcement officers are those who are very bright and very sharp. Understand that the one element that a criminal has is the element of surprise. He knows when he's going to commit a crime, and so typically law enforcement is not even there. He knows what he's going to do. However, once the crime has been committed and law enforcement have been summoned, and they're bringing all of their team to the assailant, they realize now that they're getting some control of time. They're tightening the noose, so to speak. They have the guy under surveillance. They are able to isolate this individual. And at any given time, when you control ultimately the time, you could take that shot. When you control the time, typically you win. If you're playing football and you are in control of the time, you can win. I mean, I told the coach in games that we lost, we didn't lose, we just ran out of time. Had a little bit more time, then it can come out the way you want it. Typically. Not unless, of course, the assailant does something brash or rash. Their job is to isolate and alleviate the threat from others and themselves. In that order, by the way. That's not how you're trained, I know. For those who are listening, it's not how you're trained. Used to be that law officers was trained like that. Well, you know, we the ones who come in between. Not anymore. Now it's about, well, you know, if you're in fear of your life, then you gotta do what you gotta do. I don't know where that came from. It's not a champion kind of concept. Typically, when you're a champion, when you are the hero, when you are a true knight of our society, you believe in this. You believe in defend the weak and protect the innocent. That's what you believe. At all costs, even at the risk of yourself. I believe that. I believe that. I do. At the risk of yourself. And most officers believe that, I think. There's some who don't. There's some who train otherwise. I was in fear of my life. Okay, that could mean anything. The guy's got a bobby pin. I didn't know. He went in his belt. I didn't know. Was it against the law to go in your belt? No, it's not. But I just thought maybe he was going for a gun. Well, he wasn't. It's not against the law to go in your belt. What did he do? What did he do before this? Why would you think that this guy was going to use lethal force? Well, I know he just made that brash move, and so therefore I wouldn't take any chances. Oh, you were scared. There's got to be a law that says that's not enough. Now, unless you're going to protest and you're going to put forward with your city council that law, then put your hands down. Don't go protesting. No justice, no peace. Bull crap. What you need to do is put pen to paper and put that before your city council. And what law enforcement's got to do is say, okay, either you want to be an officer under these restrictions or not. If not, it's okay. We understand. But we want only knights on this force. I don't doubt that the guy who shot the Sacramento perpetrator feel horrible. I've talked to cops who've shot people, and let me just tell you something. Not many of them would brag on that. I don't doubt that there's some. I've not talked to them, but and you know, folks I've talked to have felt very horrible about that. Now, to what happened in Texas. Go to our Facebook page. You can take a look at this. It happened just a few hours, actually, after the Sacramento shooting. There was a man who was walking down the middle of the road with his pants down to his ankles. Now, do you have the audio of this? The first one? Well, we should. Should have the first audio. And he was walking down the middle of the highway and hitting cars, and he hit this white car, to which it resulted in a young African-American male with a do-rag getting out and taking the man to task. Obviously, the man's having a mental problem. You will see, should be both videos there on our website. You will see that the young man, the young man was a gangster. I guess the guy had to be about, what, 6'2", 6'3"?
Pretty tall guy, yeah.
And a fairly stout guy, kind of bushy-haired, looking straight and stoic ahead, and just kind of walking. I mean, his pants were around his ankles. How he was getting around, He couldn't exactly run. He was just kind of lounging like he was shackled, to say the least. And you will see the young man push him in the chest, push him back. And there's talking going on. He's not saying a word. Kind of mumbling to himself, as what some witnesses said. So by this time, a deputy passed by and he sees this. And then the deputy gets out. And you have it? No? We should. The deputy gets out. And the next thing you hear is a shot. Maybe 2 shots. And at that point, the man's lying on the ground. He was shot with a single round that pierced this man's chest. The man, his name is Thomas. Danny Ray Thomas. That's his name. He lay dead there on the streets in Houston. And everybody's going, well, why? Why did they shoot him? The officer said, basically, is that he was in fear of his life. There's no doubt that this man was coming toward the officer, the deputy. I don't doubt that the deputy said, stop, stop, stop. I also don't doubt that Thomas didn't hear any of that. He's 34 years old. It's been suggested that he had some object in his hand. You go to it and take a look. I didn't see the object in his hand. Even with that, it's not against the law to have an object in your hand. I want to make that clear now. Disobeying an officer, yeah, but is that the death penalty? And look, I know that there are officers out there who are hearing me saying, oh yeah, that's easy for you to say. Yeah, it is. You really think that if in fact the young African American who got out and challenged him was able to do that, don't you think an officer was able to do the same? Is my point. That African American who got out and challenged the man, and the man then turned and then started walking in the other direction, did not shoot him. So there's an example here of a person and who is more than likely not violent, but is having a moment, a mental moment. Authorities indicated that Thomas, 34 years old, had something in his hand. According to the Houston Chronicle, the police said, we have not recovered a weapon at this point. It's not clear from the video that Thomas even had anything. I checked it, seen at least 3-4 videos, and haven't seen anything. He does not appear to be to raise his arms in any kind of manner, suggesting, as you look at it. About 3 seconds passed between the truck. You'll see one that has a truck that went by. About 3 seconds past that, that's when the shots ring out. A gunshot rang out. Marquita Thomas is the victim's sister. She told reporters that, of course, he and she have struggled with mental illness, and they supported each other. We do have her on card. I'll let her describe it.
And I'm hearing that he put his hands up and then he turns around only to get shot. Like, who justifies that? There's no justification in that whatsoever. None whatsoever. My brother was going through it, true enough. I go through it. I suffer with depression. You know what I'm saying? But I wake up every day of my life knowing that my brother was okay because of things that he went through with his kids. Knowing that he was okay when I woke up every day made me fine. And knowing that my brother is no longer here, you think I'm going to be fine? I'm not going to be fine. That's my brother. That's my whole brother. Same mom, same dad. That's my flesh and my blood. We've been through everything together. He had my back through everything. And he promised me he wouldn't leave me, and he didn't leave me. Somebody took him from me.
Horrible situation there. That's the sister who has indicated that she has some mental problems. Let me just tell you, Thomas was incarcerated about 3 years, drug problem. While he was there, his wife at the time also had a mental moment, to say the least. One that he never got over and would never forget, even something more horrid than actually serving time. Shabora Thomas back in 2016, did something very horrible. She got up one morning, and wait, I want to get the actual. Let's see here. I thought I had it here in front of me. I'm sorry about that, folks. She got up one morning and decided to take her 5- and 7-year-old to the bathtub. She allegedly drowned them. Right. First the 5-year-old, and they struggled. And then the 7-year-old, and he struggled. Then she took their lifeless bodies and laid them side by side in the bed. Shortly thereafter, that next day, she gathered the bodies up, took them to a neighbor's house next door, where she attempted to bury them. A neighbor asked her if she needed some help, and that neighbor began to help her, to which she said to him, let's see here, I killed my children. He didn't take her seriously at first. He should have. Ultimately, he did. And he then told her to get in his car. He took her to the local the precinct. Police came back and determined that she did, in fact, drown her 5-year-old and her 7-year-old. Her 12-year-old was from another father, and she had called that boy's dad and told that boy's dad that the 12-year-old was involved with gangs. He probably was strong enough, she felt, to struggle if she tried to drown him. And so the dad took him, the 12-year-old. Didn't work for the 5- and 7-year-old. They were the son and daughter of Danny Ray Thomas, who was locked up. He got out. Hadn't been right since. After finding out about it. Kayana and Ray Ray was his son and daughter. And he only recently got out of jail. So here he is now, walking down the middle of a street, busy street there in Texas, with his pants down to his ankles, mumbling to himself, hitting cars. And now he's dead. You have it. We're going to go ahead and play an excerpt of this, only because it lets you know how this happens. Now, folks, let me just say this. I've been in several situations where you have this, and I know that some people just are not crazy enough to do necessarily what some of us will do. And I am my brother's keeper, and I take that very seriously. I do. My father was the same. And especially when it comes to an older individual who's having a mental episode. You see someone who's doing something that's just, as they say, ain't right. Then nothing is not the right thing to do, bro. You've got to do something. I mean, obviously you call law enforcement. Yeah. But anything you could do to hopefully save them, even for themselves or from getting injured, you got to do that. I mean, how do you feel good about yourself? So you listen to this girl sing this guy, obviously with his pants down. She knows it's funny to her because this guy's obviously got a problem. Watch how it changes.
Got it.
Not yet.
Move, man.
Move! Move back to it. You shot that man?
Yeah, shot that man.
Why he shot him? Why he shot him? Why he shot him? Why he shot that man?
What's wrong with him, man? You know, super ass on the next one.
Okay, he should have got tased. He shouldn't have shot that man in no street. He shot that man thug. Yeah. Oh my God.
All right. as of yet, law enforcement have not indicated that the officer had a taser. There's not been any confirmation that he has one. There's no doubt that when this deputy showed up, he was showing up to hopefully curtail an altercation between the Danny Thomas and another young African-American man whose car was hit by Danny. Danny was non-compliant, continued to walk toward him, and consequently the officer felt he was necessary to kill him. Kim Jones at the Department Crime Center told the Washington Post on Saturday there was no information on whether the deputy was carrying a taser or less than lethal weapons. So, go take a look at it. We've got another view of that. You can see it. Question is, what will you do? You've got a man coming toward you with his pants around his ankles. Well, one thing's for sure, you can elude him pretty easily. You really can. I'm just saying, folks. I didn't see, there was no indication that he had anything in his hand. You could see this guy, nothing but his underwear and his pants around his ankles and a short shirt.
Yeah. Cap on his head, that's about it.
Now, the argument is going to be that I was in fear of my life. And one can make that argument with just about everything. The question is whether it was necessary, really. Were you really in fear of your life because of what the assailant had and what the assailant was doing? Or were you in fear of your life because you just scared? My weapon is my mind. My tool is my gun. And I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, we're reaching a point right now where there are those using tools who don't know how the hell to use them. I mean, I've seen it on the job site. I've seen guys that don't even know how to use a compressor or a shovel. I mean, to the point whereby it almost kills somebody. You know what I mean?
Serious machinery.
So, look, look, we're going to go some other places, but this is a story I think is worthy of some protest. But the protest should not come in the streets of law enforcement, in my view. You see, law enforcement are following the rules here, folks. There are policies, and I think the policy has to be made now, bro. For you guys who are with Black Lives Matter movement or any other kind of movement, there has to be a policy as it applies to law enforcement specifically. The rules concerning the use of lethal force has to change. It has to change, folks. And for those officers who cannot adapt to that, for those officers who feel, well, look, I can't. Look, you've got teachers in classrooms right now with students who are just as violent as what you'd find on the street. If you think it's tough for you as a law enforcement officer, you be Rip Daniels or Roe and just go through the neighborhood without having a siren, without having a Kevlar vest. I mean, you do realize, just for the average citizen is more likely to be a victim than law enforcement, is my point. You guys are knights, not necessarily in shining armor, but you are knights. You are prepared for this. That's what you do. Typically, you come to the rescue of innocent victims like a potential Roe or Rip or whoever. But if the citizens are capable of going through those very same dangerous neighborhoods
without fear,
then you're going to have to do the same. You're not there to ramrod. You're not there to place the control. I'm the executioner. You just can't be that. That is not the reason for why you have your service weapon. It's just not. Defending yourself has to come second. And even the person that you're going out, who you suspect could be a perpetrator or an assailant, has to be given the benefit of the doubt. I'll tell you why. Because the first question you ask is, has he broken any laws? And I know what you're saying to yourself. Oh, I second guess myself if I can be dead. But you know what I'm talking about? I'm talking about good old-fashioned police work. The work that one Anthony Lombard did, or so-called Killer Jackson did, or Big Al. These are all law enforcement officers that came along long before now, folks. And these folks, understood that their greatest weapon was their mind. The tool was the gun. Very rarely had to use it. Very rarely. Well, Rip, what would you do? You've got a guy that's 6'2", 6'3", coming toward you with his pants around his ankles. Well, number one, I can tell you one thing. I can elude him, and ultimately, he's going to hit the ground. And it's not going to be because I'm going to shoot him.
He's exposed his very sensitive parts for potential attack.
I mean, there are other things that you could do here, folks. I'm just saying there are. You see, the problem here comes from someone thinking they're going to lose a fight. If they lose their fight, they lose their service weapon. I've heard this from you guys who are in law enforcement. Well, you know, Rip, if I lose a fight, then I lose my life. I lose my service weapon. Gotcha. Well, then you can't lose. Thinking man never loses. I'm going to tell you that. So what did the guy do exactly? Well, misdemeanor offense, bro. He walked down the street with his pants around his ankles. He hit a guy's car.
They were in a brief altercation, and then he's dead. With his pants around his ankles.
You don't need to protest. You need to change the laws. That's what you need to do. There's ways to do that. Hang on, folks. We'll be back.
The Jackson Advocate newspaper has been the voice of black Mississippians since 1938. The Jackson Advocate wants to come into your home.